The dust hung heavy in the air as Abigail Jenkins stepped off the stagecoach, her emerald green traveling dress a beacon of color against the drab browns and grays of Silvercreek, Colorado. The year was 1878, and the mining town had seen better days. Every head turned as she made her way down the main street, parasol tilted against the harsh western sun. Men paused mid-conversation, women whispered behind gloved hands, and even the saloon doors seemed to still in the afternoon heat. Abigail, keenly aware of the attention, kept her gaze forward, chin lifted with the quiet dignity she'd carried all the way from Boston. "They stare when she passes," Ethan Fairfield drawled to the barkeeper, his worn Stetson tilted back on his head as he observed from the shaded porch of the Silver Dollar Saloon. "Let them. She's the finest thing this town has seen in all its sorry years." The barkeeper, a grizzled man named Hank who'd poured whiskey through both boom and bust, nodded sagely. "Reckon that's the banker's niece from back east. Heard tell she's come to help with his books since his eyesight's failing." Ethan watched as she disappeared into Wainwright's general store, his interest piqued more than he cared to admit. At 32, he'd long since resigned himself to the solitary life of a cattle rancher, his days filled with hard work and his nights with little more than memories and regrets. "You fixing to introduce yourself, Fairfield?" Hank's question broke through his thoughts. Ethan straightened his worn leather vest. "Just admiring the view, Hank. Like everyone else in this dust trap." But even as he said it, he knew he'd be finding a reason to visit Wainwright's before the day was through. Inside the store, Abigail was arranging to have her trunks delivered to her uncle's home at the edge of town. Mr. Wainwright, a portly man with kind eyes, was all too eager to assist. "Miss Jenkins, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Silvercreek. Your uncle has spoken of nothing else these past weeks." "Thank you, Mr. Wainwright. I hope I can be of help to him." At 26, Abigail had resigned herself to spinsterhood in Boston, content with her books and charitable work. When Uncle Frederick's letter had arrived, requesting her assistance and offering her a fresh start, she'd surprised even herself by accepting. "This town could use a civilizing influence," Mr. Wainwright continued, tallying her purchases. "Since the mine reduced operations, we've lost some of our finer families." "I'm hardly a civilizing influence," Abigail replied with a small smile. "Just a woman who's good with numbers." "Well, those numbers will keep the bank afloat, and that keeps Silvercreek afloat." He handed her a wrapped parcel. "These sundries should tide you over until your trunks arrive." As Abigail turned to leave, the bell above the door jangled, and in walked a tall man in trail-worn clothes, the dust of the plains still clinging to his boots. His face was sun-weathered, with laugh lines around eyes as blue as a summer sky. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. "Mr. Wainwright," he nodded, then his gaze fell on Abigail. For a moment, neither spoke. "Miss Jenkins, may I introduce Ethan Fairfield," Wainwright said. "Owns the Double F Ranch about 5 miles out." "Mr. Fairfield, this is Miss Abigail Jenkins, Frederick's niece from Boston." "Miss Jenkins." Ethan's voice was deep, with the slight rasp of a man who spent more time talking to cattle than people. "Welcome to Silvercreek." "Mr. Fairfield," she acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her travel-weary appearance. "Thank you." An awkward silence followed, broken by Mr. Wainwright clearing his throat. "Mr. Fairfield is one of the bank's most reliable customers. Your uncle thinks highly of him." "High praise indeed," Ethan said, a smile touching the corners of his mouth. "Though I suspect Frederick thinks highly of any man who pays his loans on time." "A rare quality, I'm sure," Abigail replied, surprised at her own boldness. Ethan's smile widened. "Rarer than gold in these parts." Their eyes met briefly, and Abigail felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. She tightened her grip on her parasol. "If you'll excuse me, I should get to my uncle's home before evening." "Of course." Ethan stepped aside, allowing her to pass, but as she reached the door, he spoke again. "Miss Jenkins, the town's holding a dance this Saturday at the schoolhouse. A welcome respite from the dust and toil. Perhaps you'll attend?" Abigail hesitated. "Perhaps, Mr. Fairfield." "Good day." Outside, she took a deep breath of the dry mountain air. The street was still busy with afternoon activity, miners coming off shift, women completing errands, children running home from school. And still, she felt the stairs, heard the whispers. In Boston, she had been one of many educated young women. Here, she was a curiosity, a novelty from the East who wore gloves and carried a parasol in a town where most women's hands were roughened by work and their faces weathered by sun. At the bank, Frederick Jenkins greeted his niece with genuine warmth. Widowed for 10 years, he had built the bank from nothing, serving the miners and ranchers with fair terms and honest dealings. Now, his failing eyesight threatened everything he'd created. "Abigail, my dear girl, you're a sight for these old eyes." He embraced her, his once imposing frame now stooped with age. "How was your journey?" "Long, Uncle Frederick, but not unpleasant." She followed him into the small but well-appointed home behind the bank. "I met a Mr. Fairfield at the general store. Ethan, one of our finest citizens, started with 100 acres and a dozen head of cattle. Now runs one of the biggest spreads in the county." Frederick settled into his favorite chair. "A self-made man, like myself. He mentioned a dance this Saturday." "Ah, yes, the Founders' Day dance. You should go. Meet the townsfolk properly, instead of being gawked at from afar." He chuckled. "I've seen how they stare. Not used to such elegance in Silvercreek." "I'm hardly elegant after days on a stage coach," Abigail protested, but her uncle waved her off. "Nonsense. You're a breath of fresh air in a dusty town. Now get settled. Tomorrow I'll show you the books." That night, as Abigail unpacked her modest belongings, she found herself thinking of Ethan Fairfield's weathered face and direct gaze. There was something about him that intrigued her: a steadiness, perhaps, or the quiet confidence of a man who had built something from nothing. In Boston, the men of her acquaintance had inherited their positions and fortunes. Ethan Fairfield had the look of a man who'd earned everything through his own sweat and determination. The next morning found Abigail at the bank, poring over ledgers with her uncle. The work was familiar and comforting, but the clientele was unlike any she'd encountered in Boston's financial institutions. Ranchers with sun-cracked skin and calloused hands, miners with coal dust embedded in their fingerprints, and shopkeepers tallying modest profits. These were the backbone of Silvercreek's economy. "Miss Jenkins," a familiar voice called just before closing. Abigail looked up from her ledger to find Ethan Fairfield standing before her desk, hat in hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Fairfield. How may I assist you?" "I need to arrange a draft for some cattle I'm purchasing from a ranch down in New Mexico territory." He placed a folded document on her desk. "Your uncle usually handles these matters, but he mentioned you'd be taking over such transactions." "Yes, of course." She accepted the paper, careful not to let their fingers touch. "I'll prepare this right away." As she worked, she was acutely aware of his presence. He stood straight-backed and patient, his gaze taking in the modest bank interior with its polished wood counter and iron safe. "Have you decided about the dance?" he asked as she completed the paperwork. "I believe I will attend, yes." She handed him the draft, properly signed and sealed. "It seems a good opportunity to meet the community." "Indeed it does." He tipped his hat. "Until Saturday, then." After he left, Uncle Frederick emerged from his office with a knowing smile. "Ethan Fairfield doesn't usually come to town twice in 1 week. Seems our leading cattleman has found a reason to leave his beloved ranch." "Uncle, please," Abigail protested, feeling her cheeks warm. He merely needed a bank draft. "A draft he could have arranged next week when he came for supplies," Frederick countered, eyes twinkling despite their cloudiness. "I've known Ethan for 10 years. He doesn't make special trips to town without good reason." Abigail busied herself with the ledger, trying to ignore the flutter of excitement at her uncle's words. Saturday evening arrived with unexpected anticipation. Abigail chose her blue silk gown, one of the few formal dresses she'd brought from Boston. As she pinned her honey blonde hair into a simple but elegant style, she wondered if she was being foolish. Ethan Fairfield was a rancher, a man of the West. What interest could he possibly have in a Boston bookkeeper beyond novelty? The schoolhouse had been transformed for the occasion. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over scrubbed plank floors cleared for dancing. A small ensemble of local musicians, a fiddler, guitarist, and accordion player, provided lively tunes. The women of the town had outdone themselves with refreshments, the tables laden with pies, cakes, and punch. Abigail entered on her uncle's arm, immediately aware of the momentary hush that fell over the gathering. She held her head high as Frederick led her through the crowd, introducing her to the town's prominent citizens, the mayor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the town doctor, and various merchants. "Miss Jenkins," Ethan's voice came from behind her. She turned to find him dressed in what was clearly his finest, a clean black suit, white shirt, and string tie, his dark hair slicked back with pomade. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Fairfield. You clean up rather well yourself." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made several heads turn. High praise from a Boston lady. "May I have this dance?" The musicians had struck up a waltz, and without waiting for her response, Ethan extended his hand. Abigail hesitated only briefly before placing her gloved fingers in his palm. As he led her to the center of the floor, she was keenly aware of the eyes following them. "They're staring again," she murmured as Ethan's hand settled respectfully at her waist. "Let them," he replied softly, guiding her into the first steps of the waltz. "You're the finest thing this town has seen in a long while, Miss Jenkins. Might as well give them something worth looking at." His directness caught her off guard, but there was something refreshing about it. In Boston, men couched their compliments in flowery language and veiled meanings. Ethan Fairfield simply spoke his mind. "You dance remarkably well for a cattleman, Mr. Fairfield," she observed as he guided her smoothly around the floor. "I wasn't always a cattleman," he replied. "My father was a professor of literature at a small college in Pennsylvania. He insisted I learn all the social graces before I ran off to seek my fortune." "And did you? Find your fortune, I mean?" A shadow crossed his features. "Not the kind I expected. But I found something better, a life I built with my own hands." The music ended too soon, and Ethan reluctantly released her. "Would you care for some punch?" Before she could answer, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of miners, clearly already deep in their cups, had stumbled in, led by a burly man with an unkempt beard. "Well, looky here," the leader slurred, his gaze falling on Abigail. "The fancy Eastern lady's come to grace us with her presence." Ethan stepped slightly in front of Abigail, his posture tense. "Barton, this isn't the place. Take your boys back to the saloon." "Free country, Fairfield," Barton sneered. "Besides, we got as much right to dance with the pretty lady as you do. More, even. We're the ones who built this town, not you cattle barons." The tension in the room was palpable. The mayor stepped forward. "Now, Jim Barton, you know the rules. No one comes to the Founders' Day dance in their cups. Take your men and sober up." For a moment, it seemed Barton might resist, but then he spat on the floor and turned. "Come on, boys. This shindig's too fancy for honest miners anyway." As they left, the atmosphere gradually lightened. The musicians struck up another tune, and conversations resumed. Ethan turned to Abigail, concern etched on his face. "I apologize for that display, Miss Jenkins. Jim Barton's been bitter since the mine cut his hours. He's not a bad sort when sober." "There's no need to apologize," she assured him. "Every community has its challenges." "Indeed." He offered his arm. "Shall we get that punch now?" The rest of the evening passed pleasantly. Abigail danced with several of the town's respectable men, including the young doctor and the middle-aged mayor, but it was Ethan who claimed the final waltz. "Would you permit me to escort you and your uncle home?" he asked as the dance concluded. "That would be most kind," Abigail replied, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. Under a canopy of stars, with Frederick walking slightly ahead, Ethan offered Abigail his arm. The night was cool, the mountain air crisp and clean after the stuffiness of the schoolhouse. "I hope Barton's interruption didn't spoil your evening," Ethan said softly. "Not at all. I found the entire affair quite illuminating." "Illuminating?" His eyebrow raised in question. "Yes. In Boston, social events are so formal, so rigid with rules and expectations. Tonight was refreshingly genuine." Ethan chuckled. "That's a polite way of putting it." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Miss Jenkins, I wonder if you might permit me to call on you properly tomorrow? Perhaps after church?" Her heart quickened at his request. "I would like that, Mr. Fairfield." "Ethan," he corrected gently. "Out here, we don't stand much on formality." "Ethan," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Then you must call me Abigail." They had reached her uncle's house. the soft glow of lamplight visible through the curtained windows. Frederick tactfully went ahead, leaving them a moment of privacy on the porch. "Good night, Abigail," Ethan said, taking her hand and raising it briefly to his lips, the gesture surprising her with its courtly grace. "Until tomorrow." "Until tomorrow, Ethan," she replied, her voice steadier than her pulse. As she prepared for bed that night, Abigail found herself contemplating the unexpected path her life had taken. A month ago, she had been a spinster bookkeeper in Boston, resigned to a life of quiet solitude. Now she stood at the threshold of something entirely new, in a place where the very air felt different in her lungs. True to his word, Ethan appeared the following afternoon, hat in hand, and a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the prairie. He had driven his wagon into town, and after obtaining Frederick's permission, a formality that clearly amused the older man, he asked Abigail if she would care to see some of the countryside. Nothing too adventurous, he promised. Just a drive out to Lookout Point. The view of the valley is something everyone should see at least once. With her uncle's blessing, Abigail found herself seated beside Ethan on the wagon bench, a parasol shielding her complexion from the western sun. As they left the town behind, he pointed out landmarks: the silver mine that had given Silvercreek its name and purpose, the creek itself winding through the valley, the distant peaks of the mountains. "How long have you been in Colorado?" she asked as the wagon climbed a gentle slope. 12 years now. Came out after the war with nothing but determination and a knack for handling cattle." He glanced at her, gauging her interest. "Worked as a hand on 3 different ranches before I saved enough to buy my own plot. Started with 100 acres and built from there." "That's quite impressive," she said sincerely. "What about you? What brought a Boston lady to our dusty corner of the world?" Abigail hesitated. "After my parents died of influenza when I was 18, I lived with my mother's sister. She remarried last year, and while her new husband was kind enough, I felt superfluous. When Uncle Frederick wrote about his eyesight failing, it seemed a perfect opportunity for a fresh start." "And is it a fresh start?" She looked out at the vast landscape, so different from Boston's crowded streets. "I believe it could be." Ethan reined the horses to a stop at a promontory overlooking the valley. Below, Silvercreek looked like a child's toy town, nestled among the pines with the silver ribbon of the creek cutting through it. Beyond, the Double F Ranch was visible in the distance, its buildings tiny specks on the vast prairie. "It's breathtaking," Abigail said softly. "This is what I saw 12 years ago," Ethan said, his voice reflective. "Not just land, but possibility. Room to breathe, to build, to become whatever I was meant to be." "Is that why you left Pennsylvania? To find that possibility?" A shadow crossed his face. "Partly. I also left because there was nothing to keep me there after the war. I lost my younger brother at Gettysburg. My father died of a broken heart 6 months later. My mother followed within the year." "I'm so sorry," Abigail said, genuinely moved by the quiet pain in his voice. "It was a long time ago," he replied, though his eyes said otherwise. "Out here, a man can reinvent himself. Leave the past where it belongs." They sat in companionable silence, watching the play of sunlight across the valley as afternoon began its slow transition to evening. "We should head back," Ethan said reluctantly. "I promised your uncle I'd have you home before sundown." As they drove back toward town, Abigail found herself wondering about this man beside her: his quiet strength, his evident intelligence, the pain he carried but rarely showed. He was unlike anyone she had known in Boston, a man shaped by hardship and determination rather than privilege and expectation. Over the following weeks, Ethan found increasingly frequent reasons to visit town. He would stop by the bank on cattle business, inquire about local supplies at Wainwright's when Abigail happened to be there, and once even attended a literary society meeting at the schoolhouse where Abigail was reading Tennyson. Each time, their conversations grew longer, more personal, their connection deepening like a river cutting its path through stone slowly but inexorably. Abigail, for her part, found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and frightened her. At 26, she had long since resigned herself to spinsterhood, focusing instead on her work and intellectual pursuits. Now, feelings long dormant were awakening, and she wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. Then came the day Jim Barton and his miners called their strike. The Silver Bell mine had announced another reduction in operations, cutting hours and men. Barton, appointed spokesman for the miners, led them in refusing to work until conditions and pay improved. Tension filled Silvercreek as the strike entered its second week. The miners, growing desperate, began to eye the bank with suspicion, believing Frederick Jenkins and the other business owners were in league with the absent mine owners. "I don't like this situation," Ethan told Abigail as they walked after church one Sunday. "Barton's a hothead, and there are rumors they're drinking heavily at their camp outside town." "Surely they wouldn't do anything foolish," Abigail said. "Most have families in town." "Desperate men do desperate things," Ethan replied grimly. "I want you and Frederick to be careful. Keep the bank doors locked except during business hours, and consider staying with friends in town rather than at the isolated house." "Uncle Frederick would never leave his home," she protested. "And I won't leave him." Ethan's jaw tightened with concern, but he nodded. "Then I'll have some of my ranch hands keep an eye on the place, just as a precaution." 2 nights later, Abigail was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, as rough voices echoed from downstairs. Throwing on her robe, she hurried to her uncle's room. Finding him already awake and reaching for the shotgun he kept beside his bed. "Stay here," he instructed, his voice surprisingly steady. "Bar the door after me." "Uncle, no," she protested. "Your eyesight, I can still see well enough to shoot at close range," he cut her off. "Now do as I say." Before she could argue further, shouts erupted from below, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Frederick pushed past her, shotgun in hand, and headed for the stairs. Torn between obedience and fear for her uncle, Abigail followed, staying in the shadows of the upstairs hallway. Below, she could see 3 men, their faces obscured by bandanas, ransacking the parlor while a 4th tried to force open the door that connected the house to the bank. "That's far enough." Frederick's voice boomed with authority. "The next man who moves gets a chest full of buckshot." The intruders froze momentarily, then the largest of them laughed. "Old man, you can't even see us proper. Put that scattergun down before you hurt yourself." "I can see well enough," Frederick replied, leveling the shotgun. "Now get out of my house before I demonstrate just how good my aim still is." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the men lunged toward Frederick. The shotgun roared in the confined space, the blast deafening. The man fell back with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. "I told you," Frederick said, his voice cold. "Next one goes center mass." But the shot had thrown off his balance, and as he struggled to steady himself on the stairs, another intruder rushed him. Abigail screamed as her uncle was knocked backward, the shotgun clattering down the steps. Frederick landed hard, his head striking the edge of a stair with a sickening thud. "Uncle!" Abigail rushed to his side as the intruders regrouped. Well, the leader said, pulling down his bandana to reveal Jim Barton's bearded face. "The fancy Boston lady comes to the rescue." "You animals," Abigail spat, cradling her uncle's bleeding head. "He needs a doctor." "He'll get one after we've helped ourselves to what's owed us," Barton replied. "The mine owners keep their cash in that bank, and we're just collecting our wages." A new voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Barton." Ethan stood in the doorway, revolver drawn and aimed steadily at Barton's chest. Behind him were 3 of his ranch hands, similarly armed. "This ain't your fight, Fairfield," Barton growled. "You made it my fight when you broke into this house," Ethan replied, his voice deadly calm. "Now drop your weapons and clear out before this gets worse for you." A tense standoff followed, broken when the wounded man groaned in pain. Barton's resolve visibly wavered. "We just want what's owed us," he said, less conviction in his voice. "And you think this is the way to get it?" Ethan's disgust was palpable. Attacking an old man and frightening a lady? This isn't justice, it's thuggery. One of Barton's companions lowered his pistol. "Jim, this ain't right. Jenkins always dealt fair with us." The momentum shifted, and Barton's shoulders sagged in defeat. "Fine, but this isn't over. The mine owners will answer for their actions." Ethan cut him off. "But not like this. Not through violence against innocent people." As Ethan's men disarmed the intruders, Abigail remained focused on her uncle, whose breathing had become shallow and labored. He needs the doctor now, she urged, her hands pressed to the wound on his head. Ethan holstered his revolver and knelt beside her, his face grave as he assessed Frederick's condition. Davis, he called to one of his men. Ride for Doc Wallace. Fast as you can. As the ranch hand departed, Ethan gently lifted Frederick and carried him to a sofa in the parlor. Keep pressure on that wound, he instructed Abigail, his voice gentle but urgent. The next hours passed in a blur of fear and hope. Doc Wallace arrived, his examination thorough but his expression guarded. Concussion, certainly. Possibly a fracture. We'll know more if when he regains consciousness. If. Abigail's voice trembled. The doctor placed a compassionate hand on her shoulder. Your uncle is elderly, Miss Jenkins. Head injuries at his age. We must be prepared for any outcome. Ethan, who had remained at her side throughout, spoke quietly. Doc, what can we do? Keep him comfortable. Watch for any changes. I'll return in the morning. He packed his bag with a weary sigh. The sheriff's taken Barton and his men into custody. This strike has gone too far. After the doctor left, Ethan insisted on staying. You shouldn't be alone, he said simply, brooking no argument. Throughout the long night, they took turns sitting with Frederick, whose breathing remained steady but who showed no signs of waking. In the gray hours before dawn, Abigail found herself sharing the vigil with Ethan, both too worried to sleep. I can't lose him, she said softly, her hand holding her uncle's. He's all the family I have left. Ethan's hand covered hers. Frederick Jenkins is the toughest old bird in the territory. If anyone can pull through this, he can. She looked up at him, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes. Thank you for coming when you did. How did you know? I had men watching the house, remember? When they saw Barton and his gang approach, one rode for me while the other followed them in. His jaw tightened. I just wish we'd been quicker. You saved our lives, she said with quiet certainty. Their eyes held, and in that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings too strong to be denied any longer. Ethan's hand tightened around hers. Abigail, a soft groan from Frederick interrupted whatever Ethan had been about to say. They both turned to see the old man's eyelids fluttering. Uncle. Abigail leaned forward eagerly. Can you hear me? Frederick's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually clearing. Abigail, what happened? Relief washed over her like a wave. You were injured during the break-in. How do you feel? Like I've been kicked by a mule, he grumbled. Then his gaze shifted to Ethan. Fairfield, did you get them? The sheriff has them in custody, Ethan confirmed. They won't trouble you again. Frederick attempted to sit up, but was gently restrained by Abigail. Stay still, uncle. Doctor's orders. To their surprise, Frederick chuckled weakly. Always giving orders, just like your mother. His eyes, though pained, held clarity. Did I at least wing one of the scoundrels? You did indeed, Ethan confirmed with a small smile. Barton's right-hand man will have a sore shoulder to remember you by. Good. Frederick settled back against the pillows. Now, if you two don't mind, I think I need more rest. As his eyes closed again, Abigail and Ethan withdrew to the kitchen, where the first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the windows. Exhaustion and relief left Abigail feeling strangely lightheaded. He's going to be all right, she said, half to herself. Yes, he is. Ethan poured coffee from the pot he'd prepared earlier, handing her a cup. Frederick Jenkins is too ornery to let a bump on the head stop him. She accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The touch sent a current through her tired body, awakening feelings she could no longer ignore. Ethan, what were you going to say? Before Uncle woke up? He set his cup down carefully, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I was going to say that I've fallen in love with you, Abigail Jenkins. That watching you these past months, your kindness, your intelligence, your courage has made me realize what I've been missing all these years. The directness of his declaration left her momentarily speechless. I know it's sudden, he continued, misinterpreting her silence. And I know that a cattleman from the Colorado Territory is hardly what a Boston lady might have envisioned for herself. But I had to tell you, especially after tonight. Life's too uncertain to leave important things unsaid. Abigail found her voice at last. It's not sudden at all, she said softly. It's been building since the moment you told me to let them stare, because I was the finest thing this town had seen. His eyes widened in surprise, then warmed with understanding. You heard that? I did. She set her own cup down and stepped closer to him. And I've been falling in love with you ever since, though I was too afraid to admit it even to myself. Ethan reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. I'm not a wealthy man, Abigail, not by Eastern standards. But I have a good ranch, a strong back, and a heart that's yours if you want it. Those are the only riches that matter, she replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. And yes, Ethan Fairfield, I want your heart. Very much. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with the emotion they'd both held in check for so long. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. I should go check on your uncle, Ethan said reluctantly. And I should make a proper breakfast, Abigail agreed. The doctor will return soon. But neither moved immediately, savoring the moment and the promise it held. In the weeks that followed, as Frederick recovered under Abigail's careful nursing, Ethan was a constant presence. The town, shocked by the violence of the break-in, rallied around the Jenkins family. Even the striking miners, embarrassed by Barton's actions, distanced themselves from the attack and eventually reached a compromise with the mine owners. When Ethan formally asked Frederick for Abigail's hand, the old banker feigned surprise that fooled no one. About time, he grumbled, though his eyes twinkled. Was wondering when you'd get around to making an honest woman of my niece. Their wedding, held in the white-clapboard church on a crisp autumn day, drew the entire town. Abigail, radiant in a cream silk gown with a crown of wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair, walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm to where Ethan waited, looking both nervous and proud in a new black suit. Dearly beloved, the minister began, his voice carrying through the packed church. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. As they exchanged vows, Abigail thought back to her arrival in Silvercreek months earlier, how alien it had felt, how uncertain her future had seemed. Now, looking into Ethan's clear blue eyes as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life, she knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared. You may kiss your bride. Ethan's kiss was tender and reverent, but with a promise of passion that brought color to Abigail's cheeks and cheers from the assembled guests. At the reception in the schoolhouse, decorated with autumn leaves and wildflowers, Frederick Jenkins rose to offer a toast. His head still bore the scar from his injury, but his eyes were clear and his voice strong. To my niece Abigail, who came west to help an old man and found love instead. He raised his glass. And to Ethan Fairfield, who recognized the finest thing this town has ever seen when she stepped off that stagecoach. May your years together be as boundless as these Colorado skies and as rich as the land you love. Glasses clinked, congratulations flowed, and the celebration continued late into the night. But the moment Abigail treasured most came when Ethan led her out under the stars for a quiet moment alone. Happy, Mrs. Fairfield? He asked, his arms encircling her waist. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, she replied truthfully. Though I suspect they're all staring at us again. Ethan laughed, the sound as free and open as the land he'd claimed as his own. Let them, he said, echoing words spoken months before. You're still the finest thing this town has ever seen. And now you're mine. As you are mine, she answered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, no longer caring who might be watching. 1 year later, Abigail stood on the porch of the ranch house Ethan had expanded for their growing family, cradling their infant daughter in her arms as she watched her husband return from the fields. The Double F Ranch was thriving under their combined efforts, Abigail's head for business complementing Ethan's knowledge of cattle and land. Frederick, who had moved to the ranch after selling the bank to a younger man from Denver, sat in his rocker nearby, whittling a toy horse for his great niece. They'll be staring at this little one too, when she's grown, the old man observed, nodding at the sleeping infant. She's got your looks and her father's spirit. Abigail smiled, watching Ethan dismount and stride toward them, his face lighting up at the sight of his family waiting. Then let them stare, she said softly. Some things are worth looking at. And as Ethan gathered her and their daughter in his embrace, she knew that the journey that had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life, had been worth every uncertain step along the way.